English translation.
Let us continue with the contact reports and the anger by Bernadette Brand.
The same malicious and malevolent interventions that made Billy's life difficult when he retrieved the 900th contact report also occurred and are occurring again with this contact report. Not only do individual words simply disappear from the report, or suddenly appear in the wrong place in a sentence when the retrieved text is being written down, not to mention the countless spelling mistakes, numbers and punctuation marks that suddenly appear in the words and sentences completely unmotivated, but also, and this is by far the worst, entire sentences and complete sections simply disappear from the report. It is quite possible that the texts that have disappeared are entire coherent, page-long explanations, as was the case with this current 901st contact report, for example. For this reason, Billy has decided to pre-publish the first part of the current contact report, so to speak, so that some of the highly important information can find its way into the public domain as quickly as possible. As soon as he has retrieved the second part of the report, corrected it and retrieved again what has disappeared from the computer after retrieval, and the following correction work, which can again bring to light what is missing, wrong and confused, has finally been completed. The second part of the contact report will be merged with the first part, and the complete report will be published again. So here's the first part of the 901st contact report.
901st contact Sunday, 24th November, 2024, 7:26 hours.
I am even earlier than you, because when you called me, I thought you were already in my office. But welcome and greetings, Quetzal, my friend.
Greetings also to you, Edward. I'm glad to see you well again.
Yes, I am doing reasonably well again, but the 4 hours in hospital were not exactly pleasant because my blood pressure was over 200, so I really had hypertension. Normally, blood pressure is 150 to 155 to 70 to 80 or so. Hypertension is permanently damaging, and high blood pressure, especially above 200 millimeters of mercury, can cause damage to blood vessels, other organs, or the heart. I know this, even though I am not a doctor. And I am also familiar with the fact that blood pressure is measured in millimeters of mercury, which is abbreviated to mmHg for short, where Hg is the chemical symbol for mercury. There are two measurements for blood pressure, namely the systolic and diastolic values. The upper or higher number indicates the so-called systolic blood pressure value, the lower number, the diastolic blood pressure value. The blood pressure readings are nothing more than excess pressure values compared to the atmosphere, which are normally measured in the unit millimeters of mercury, as it used to be. I am not very well educated in this regard, but I am sure you, with your medical knowledge, can say or explain more.
In the case of high blood pressure, the pressure in the blood vessels is too high, but to say more about this would go beyond our time frame, so I will beam some things to your computer when I get the chance, which you can then also copy. For now, however, I will explain that blood pressure levels vary according to age and gender, namely.
Yes, I know that because there is a list about it that I have here in the computer. Hang on, I will look for it. Yes, here. This is it. Age 20 to 29 years old, 119/75. Women and 129/78 men. Age 30 to 39 years old, 122/78. Women and 130/84. Men age 40 to 49 years old, 130/82. Women and 135/88. Men. Age 50 to 59 years old, 143/86 women, and 143/89 men. Age 60 to 69 years old, 153/86. Women, and 150/88. Men. Age 70 to 79 years old, 155/83 women, and 153/83 men. What do you say? Is this calculated for Earthlings?
That is largely correct and so to accept.
Then I can feel calmer and can resort to home remedies if necessary, like drinking a glass of water or a glass of beetroot juice. Note: beetroot equals beetroot. If there are any in the house, of which Eva usually always has 1 or 2 in the fridge, as salad vegetables for Selena. I also know that beetroot contains nitrate, which lowers blood pressure, as I know from Svath, who also said that eating a good piece of dark chocolate is helpful against high blood pressure. Black chocolate as an antihypertensive should contain at least 85% cocoa because the flavonoids it contains are extremely important as they have an effect on blood pressure and lowering it. At any rate, I think I still remember his instruction in this regard. Unfortunately, however, my memory is no longer the best, as my stroke a few years ago has damaged it, as has also my speech, which always causes me difficulties and makes me stutter somehow.
You should not judge yourself by that, because it has nothing to do with your intelligence or your intelligentum or your healthy normality. Consequently, the damage does not affect you in any wise in that regard. And the fact that you were able to recover so quickly after your stroke, thanks to your mental efforts, and that only a slight and temporary impairment of speech is left behind.
All right, that is all there really is to it. So on the whole, it can be assumed that I have remained normal and...
Of course, that is really not a question. But what I still have to say about high blood pressure is that a value of 120 to 75 to 80 millimeters of mercury is normal for Earth humans at a young age, as it is also for us Plejaren, so we do not have any other values to report. However, this value applies to us up to a much higher age, because our life expectancy is many times higher than that of Earth humans. As far as you are concerned, you can be very happy with your normal blood pressure of 150 to 155 to 70 to 85. A basic distinction is made between systolic and diastolic high blood pressure, whereby the classification is based on whether either the upper or lower value is elevated. It should be noted that in severe cases of high blood pressure, both values can be elevated. At rest blood pressure values of 120/80 are considered ideal in young adult men and women, both in Earth humans and also in U.S. Plejaren. Nevertheless, a blood pressure of 139/89 is still normal, and there is no reason to fear any health risks. So a value above 129/84 can also be considered quite normal.
That is really reassuring, but we have probably talked enough about that now. So something else. I have often noticed that my way of talking rubs off on you, because you are speaking more and more like me. Have you also noticed that?
That is indeed the case, because our many conversations that we have outside of those that are not recalled by you and not written down effectively shape the forms of my expression and way of speaking.
That is exactly what I have been noticing for quite some time. So it really is the case that talking to each other rubs off, as we say. That has also always happened to me when I have stayed somewhere for a long time. Then I have automatically adopted the dialect and the way of speaking there.
Which is the rule when living together and the use of language is intensively and correctly cultivated and comes into its own.
That is probably so. Unfortunately, however, this is not done intensively among the Earthlings, but only superficially, for it is generally the case that interests are also only partially and incompletely perceived. Consequently, the whole of life, its behavior and guidance is effectively no longer consciously directed, but only perceived and exercised somehow superficially and as if blindly. Over the last 8 decades, humanity on Earth has become extremely and so intrusively inattentive and fast-moving, and without any real profound interests that it is leading to more and more disasters. People are now just foolishly and thoughtlessly chasing after sporting events, pleasure, and wealth without being self-motivated and doing anything sensible. Altruism is no longer in demand at all, in such a wise that there is a complete alienation from fellow human beings. Consequently, there is no longer any consideration for them, and they are not given any thought or any valuable and honest behavior, and also no selfless concern in complete unselfishness and selflessness. The majority of human beings do things and help their fellow human beings simply out of a desire to make a big profit and gain advantages for themselves. As a result, helping is not done because it is considered necessary as a human being's duty, loyalty, or for any other reason of true humanity, and the human being feels obliged to do so. It is not done out of selfless concern for other human beings, but things are done and help is given simply out of a desire to gain profit from it. That is to say, not in order to really help in feeling humanity, and therefore also not because it is a human being's duty, loyalty, or any other altruistic reasons that oblige them to do so. Because altruism is a human obligation that states that the human being should endeavor and act helpfully out of concern for the well-being of other human beings. This means that human beings should engage in altruistic behavior for the benefit of other human beings, which should also be based on mutual and therefore future reciprocal support. Sporting events, alotria, pleasure of all kinds, luxury. Electronic entertainment, doing nothing, and lazing around, as well as wealth, have become so ingrained in human beings, and thus the order of the day, that they are slowly but surely rotting away. The majority of humanity is visibly becoming more and more lax with regard to various interests, and consequently also more inactive with regard to valuable self-activity, as well as with regard to profound thinking, and thus becoming more and more non-thinking and therefore lowly intelligent and hypocritical, especially through faith, which stifles any clear, reasonable, and real self-thinking. Today's technology, which was invented 1,500 to 2,000 years too early, and with which today's humanity is not yet able to deal and cope, leads the Earthlings into a dilemma of faith and decay. Through modern technology and all the products of electronics, tablets, notebooks, and computers of all shapes and sizes, the world today is not only the most popular in the market, but is flooded with all humanity. There is hardly a human being left who does not walk around with a mobile phone in their ear or hand, possibly endangering themselves in the overflowing traffic of life. The modern technology that today's human beings cannot control has made them inattentive in their perception, because they only focus on the technical products available to them, primarily their mobile phones. As a result, however, they lose interest in their surroundings and are also unable to concentrate, as they are constantly distracted from reality and are no longer focused on it because it no longer exists in their inattention to it. Information about reality is no longer perceived, neither absorbed nor stored. This is because the ability to perceive is completely blocked, and there is also no longer any self-control, and therefore no stability or cognitive effort, which means that the functions of learning, remembering, knowledge, effective connections, and, as already mentioned, perception and independent thinking are completely absent. As a result, all conscious concentration disappears and is thus lost and impossible to exercise. The human being, however, becomes stultified as a result, and prevents and blocks his innate ability to develop or consciously evolve. He atrophies in all cognitive abilities, loses all conscious interests, becomes level-headed, dull-witted, stupid, and somehow apathetic towards reality and its truth. And it is frightening to realize that this is already effectively spreading among the majority of humanity. And this fact of the gradual dumbing down of large masses of Earthlings can probably no longer be stopped. This is also realized by those who sit in the governments of the world and know that they can do what they want with impunity, because the large masses of the already dumb in the nations have become so stupid that they no longer even think of rebelling against it. Consequently, they let everything happen to them that is served to them. But what should be said openly is what I asked you about, and you said that you would first ask the committee what their view is, and whether what I asked you should be said openly.
That is what I was asking about, and it was explained to me that it was of the right thing to do if we talk about it openly, and then you write everything down when you retrieve our conversation.
Oh, then I was correct in thinking that we are publicizing some of what is the truth about very many of the world's presidents, when they are of the unrighteous variety and abuse their might to the hilt. So that which, according to your records, corresponds to the emerging realities and all their truth should be said. Some of what you have gathered should be said openly, at least some of it by Semyase, Bermunda, and by you, Quetzal, as well as by Florina and Anjana, and finally also by me, who have seen and, so to speak, witnessed many things myself when I was allowed to accompany one of you through the times of the past or the future. Of course, I do not want to engage in politics with everything that will be discussed, because this is as far removed from me as believing in a religion or an imaginary dear God and God the Father, etc., but I will simply write what I have found out and what I have heard. What is happening now or in the future, if I can take responsibility for what I say in the future, and what should be mentioned openly. Doing politics myself has never been, and is also not my thing now, so I stay away from it like the devil from holy water, as the Christians say. So what I have to say about politics is only what is achieved through it. So I never engage in politics in any form, but only ever mention what is decided and acted upon by this or that political decision, for which I take the liberty of saying, without politicizing, whether a political decision and action resulting from it is, in my logical opinion, good or bad or correct or wrong. This, such as, for example, that only Russia or Putin is constantly cursed in public, that mercenaries are hired and deployed for the war in Ukraine, but that Zelensky has been doing the same thing for years and even employing American mercenaries and Swiss mercenaries, as well as those from Germany, France, and England, etc., for war purposes, is wisely kept silent about due to partisan bias, and only Russia is made a pig of. And in the same tone, the idiocy is to denounce the fact that more and more war enthusiasts, presidents, and other imbeciles are demanding that more and more offspring should be nonsensically brought into the world. But the more and more earthlings populate the world, the more wars will be triggered and waged. The bottom line is that the more human beings there are, and as a result of the constant reduction in size, the more limited the free space for individuals inevitably becomes, the more precarious the ability to get along with one another also becomes. Inevitably, this not only leads to conflict, but the massive overgrowth and thus overpopulation also increases the number of arguments between human beings, because they are increasingly crowded together and no longer have any real freedom of movement, which inevitably leads to such differences of opinion and demands, wishes and desires that ultimately trigger aggression, fisticuffs, violence, and war. The fact is, what I have seen and experienced and discovered during my stays in all countries worldwide, already together with Svath, and to this day often also with you, faithful Plejaren, which has opened my senses already in my earliest adolescence, and I have experienced firsthand what is going wrong in Earth-human behavior, etc. So I realize that very many of all the politicians and state presidents are a collection of very strongly manic, power-obsessed people who are elected, or also newly elected for a certain number of years, who then exercise their thumb of a presidency through which they are not true righteous people, and that they can and are allowed to devise and commit many limitlessly wrong and also worst crimes, without any of these persons ever being brought to justice and punished, as is unfortunately common on Earth, because all these powerful people and their fellow travelers usually enjoy unjustified complete immunity from the law, and thus escape any punishment. Very often they are also of religious faith, which they vehemently and mendaciously deny, like many others who work for the authorities, the military, the police, and other state offices, and are believers in Christianity. These also exercise might and terror against the citizenry and advocate laws, ordinances, regulations, and orders, etc., that are against all reason and common sense, and are also ridiculous. This is also currently being practiced and directed against us, which has been the case for around 50 years, because we from the Figu are foreign fools, so to speak, and we also keep our distance from any religious beliefs. From the very beginning, when we moved into Hinterschmidruti, this was enough for fanatical Christian believers in the Tus Valley, whether in Schmidruti or the surrounding area. I do not know. To phone us at all hours of the night, threaten us, and wish death and the devil on us. Even notes with nasty threats were pinned to the front door, while Amata Stetter and Olga Walder, as well as Margaret Flammer, were insulted and threatened on the way to the center as witches who should be burned alive at the stake as they used to be, including me, who was Satan himself in human form, and the UFOs we were dealing with could be nothing other than ghost ships packed with devils, etc. This was finally enough for Amata. In the end, This was enough for Amata, Olga, and Margaret to leave our community out of fear and go their separate ways. But I kept quiet about it and did not say anything to anyone, because I did not want any more hatred or anything like that to arise from our side against the people of Shmedruti and the surrounding area. Besides, I did not know who the people were who were working against us. Nobody ever said their name on the phone, men and women, who thought it necessary to insult and threaten us on the phone and demand that we should get out of here because sectarians, etc., did not belong here. And the fact that we were not religiously active was also held against us and associated with Satan. We at Figu have nothing to do with UFOs, religion or sectarianism, and therefore also nothing to do with beliefs or fantasies, etc. We at Figu are aware of the effective truth that it is not a god, a religion, angels, saints, spirits, and also not a belief in them that is truly creation and does not demand any humility from human beings, but respect, understanding, and reason. The human being, however, who is addicted to a religious belief, to a belief in God or in angels, in the Son of God, in saints, in spirits, etc., and who believes in such a way that a God has created everything, and that such a God rules and controls everything and everyone, is following something wrong. The human being of any religion knows and recognizes creation for what it truly and effectively and really is, namely nature and the entire universal existence in this respect, and thus all the energy and power existing in it, besides which nothing, and not even the tiniest iota of anything else exists. We at Figu know and represent this, as members of the core group, as passive members, patrons and like-minded people worldwide without worshipping or adoring creation, but simply holding it in dignity and honor, appreciating it, and protecting it to the best of our ability and capacity. And this should be the duty of every human being, because it is only through this creation, through its energy and power, which is correctly called the life energy of creation, that he is able to live and exist, like everything and everyone in the realm of creation and its universe in general. So it should be taught that not a god, son of God, etc., but nature and its universe-wide existence and energy and power is the true and given creation, which should be respected and protected in dignity and honor, because its energies and powers ensure all life of everything that exists. This energy and power, the creation energy and its power, ensure that every life can evolve and thus continue to develop, and that over and over again across new lives or existences. Not, as human beings erroneously and falsely mislead, that this happens through rebirth, but in such a way that after the death of a life form, be it human being, animal, creatures, or any other self-propelling life form, as well as any plant, such as a tree, a flower, a blade of grass, an algae or a moss, a stone, a rock or soil, everything is part of evolution and renews itself again after its passing. However, it is not reborn as the same thing, as esoterically, religiously or otherwise erroneously believed, which is why there is also no rebirth of human beings, and they cannot prepare themselves for a next life through wishes and the like, such as that they will be man or woman, king or full of knowledge and wisdom. And that is also good and correct, because if there were a rebirth and that human beings could predetermine, or also only wish that they would be this and that in the next life, then the catastrophe would be much greater than it already is on Earth, as violence, murder, and manslaughter prevail and wars shake the world. If wishes or predestinations for a next life could be fulfilled, then an excessive number of power-hungry people, murderers, manslayers, perpetrators of war, thieves, burglars, work-shy people, and scum of all kinds would be born again and would flood the world as a whole. This would mean that things here on Earth would become much worse than what all these crimes and criminal Ausardungs have brought and continue to bring upon Earth humans since time immemorial, and have rapidly increased since the advent of overpopulation. Murderers, power-hungry and warmongers, etc. would predetermine similar ambitions for the next life, whereby these would then flood all humanity, whereby, for example, even all murder would be surpassed by the military armies, as would all crime and criminality in total. Well, the creation life energy, when the human being has died, probably revives a human being again after some time, but an absolutely new consciousness of an absolutely new personality. The life energy that has escaped from the human being's body when it lingers for a long time in the realm of rest. Resting and processing, what human beings call the afterlife, works out everything that has been enriched in material life into evolutionary knowledge and uses it to create new developmental values. These are evaluated in the life of the new personality, without any relevance to the previous person, in a completely neutral and self-determining way according to the entire environment into which it is born. Consequently, every newly born personality is in every wise self-determining as to what it wants to develop into, whether it wants to be influenced by its parents and their upbringing, by relatives, friends, school or the authorities, the military, etc., or whether it wants to develop independently, according to its own abilities and specifications, etc., and become a true human being or not. Now back to what I was talking about regarding the Figu and all the attacks against us. These kinds of verbal attacks have died down, but new rumors have emerged. These are because we have the lights switched on at night and have surveillance and night watch by persons, which has stopped the malicious damage, and we now have peace of mind. Namely, so simple-minded that we would only do this so that the UFOs could land safely. This idiotic and ridiculous claim was recently brought to my attention, and is obviously being spread by people who still believe that we in Hinterschmidruti have something to do with UFOs. But we do not, because we do not deal with these unidentified flying objects in any wise. I do not know how this claim came about in the first place, namely that I am involved with UFOs. But perhaps it is because I was able to photograph a V formation of UFOs over Zurich at the beginning of the 1960s. And I then made the photo available to a newspaper, which was later also published by the Vates in the UFO news in Germany. But we in Hinterschmidruti have been terrorized for around 50 years, harassed with crazy laws and regulations, etc., and even hauled before the public prosecutor's office. Probably also in court and fined in the end, because we did the correct thing to put the dilapidated buildings, landslides in the church path and the completely demolished meadowland back in order. And this is being done by people from the authorities who were not even born or were underage children 50 years ago, when everything was done and we put everything in order at our own expense, and we are still doing it, but who are now powerfully posturing and directing, although they have no idea of the necessity of the work to be done or even of the work itself. And this is also the case if they have learnt an office job, etc., like those, for example, who pointlessly pass laws that ultimately bring harm instead of benefit if they are obeyed. Well, before we bought the completely dilapidated Hinterschmidruti and restored everything, which has lasted until now, creating a paradise, so to speak, the responsible authority did absolutely nothing to remedy all the precariousness that prevailed in the Hinterschmidruti and its surroundings. As a result, the authorities never complained that the former owners and residents of Hinterschmidruti had simply cut a hole in the septic tank and dug a channel in the ground, as a result of which the domestic slurry was then discharged into the public watercourse and flowed into public waters. And this also went on for 18 years without the authorities even once looking into the matter and taking action. The fact that the hunters shot at the game from the kitchen windows and from the barn window was also never objected to. So it was only when the Figu moved into Hinterschmidruti that something was done about it, and I prohibited them from continuing to shoot from the windows. As a result, the police were notified, and a raiding party from Winterthur arrived. But the commander then granted me our right to continue shooting at the game from the kitchen windows and the barn window. The authorities also did not care that the cement pipes of the public waterways, 4 mountain water drains, were completely blocked and torn, and the water simply flowed over the natural road. So we Figuans put this right, which is now criticized by the authorities because we had to put other things right in the area and lay a makeshift water pipe so that the new material was not washed away. 2 policemen and 5 members of the authorities and the new forester, none of whom understood, and also do not understand, what had to be done to put the necessary things in order, but cited nonsensical laws and regulations to penalize all efforts to put things in order. And the fact that these people were not yet born around 50 years ago, or were small children, and have no idea how everything was more than just precariously mismanaged back then, and the authorities did nothing about it. They come here today and cite laws and ordinances that everything should be painstakingly and expensively. restored to its precarious and completely dilapidated original state, and that what has been put in order should be penalized. Everything that we have put back in order in terms of buildings, land, forests, and public waters, which has cost us more than hundreds of thousands of francs, and to which the authorities have not contributed a single cent, is now being rewarded by the fact that we are being punished for wrongdoing. We also kept the municipal road in order at our own expense because the authorities did not, which is still the case today, and we are constantly having to repair potholes, and thus the road. We also clear the snow ourselves, although this would be our duty at the expense of the authorities, but we only get the devil's thanks for our efforts. It really makes you wonder where the law is and whether the whole thing should be publicized in the media so that the whole world knows what is going on here. Well, only once, when the water pipe to Schmidruti had to be relayed, was the road reworked in a rather cheap-wise way. But that was years ago, and the authorities do not bother to keep it in good order, so we do it ourselves and at our own expense, just like before. This also included the fact that the authorities did not care when the former owners of Hinter Schmidruti cleared the forest, which involved large areas that we had reforested by Figu using external labor, and also planted new plants around the area. Then someone from the municipality commissioned 2 transport companies, without my knowledge, to bring in large quantities of excavated material from somewhere and dump it, creating 2 large sites, which is now being criticized many years later, and for which I'm being held liable, even though I had nothing whatsoever to do with it. At the time, I was also not informed who had issued the order from the authorities that these 2 companies were transporting many loads of hundreds of cubic meters of excavated material in large tipper trucks, and then unloading it onto Hinter Schmidrutigende, where the car parks are today. This was done without me being informed in advance, and when I asked who had given the order, I was curtly told that someone from the municipal administration had given the order. Despite my further questions, I only received the answer that I should ask the mayor, Mr. Chumi. This happened in addition to many other things, such as the fact that we were also wronged, and our house roof and the Eternate house wall were smashed with large stones from a slingshot mounted on the hilltop, which meant we had to have them completely rebuilt. An army guard also shredded and cut up 300 fir seedlings, etc. But we did not report this to the police, nor did we report any other incidents or the attempts on my life, even when Figu members came within a hair's breadth of being hit and possibly dying. Only once in Marauli did a police report arise because the President of India, Dr. Radhakrishnan, was present at the assassination attempt and insisted that the police be notified. At that time, I was hit by a bullet in my left arm, but I did not lose my arm. I then went back to Europe, but after 3 months, where I took over and carried out piecework armoring work in Zurich, I was on my way back to Persia and West Pakistan to work in India again. Coming from Greece, I was approached in Istanbul by a Swiss man who called himself Robert Tazouzi and asked me to travel with him through Turkey and Syria because he wanted to go to Israel. And as the man obviously needed help because he did not speak any foreign languages, he only spoke Swiss German and German, I agreed and took the diversions via southern Turkey and Syria to bring him to Jordan, from where he could then travel to Israel. Well, that did not quite work out, because I lost my left arm in a bus accident in southern Turkey when another bus rammed into the side of the bus I was on in Iskenderun on my way to Bab el Hawa Gate of the Winds, and Syria, while Robert Suzy had already traveled ahead in an earlier bus and we wanted to meet up again in Syria. In Halep Aleppo, where rebels coming from the south would soon spread out, killing and destroying, because a civil war broke out in 2011 that is still being waged by rebels today. But Syria was already a hotbed of violence in the 1960s. And when I was there once, I experienced in Damascus how Hafiz al-Assad, he was probably the Secretary General of the Ba'ath Party at the time and also the Minister of Defense or something, had guns set up on the streets of the city and fired into the crowds as I witnessed myself. I could see that one of the guns was an old anti-aircraft gun that had been used as an anti-aircraft gun in the 1914 to 1918 World War. Assad later became president and a dictator, so to speak, while his son Bashar studied in England and became a dentist, but was then recalled by his dictator father and in time became the dictator of Syria. This dictatorship led to an ongoing rebellion during the time of Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, which is still continuing throughout Syria today and will now reach as far as Halep, with parts of the rebel army going on a murderous rampage in Halep this year. I do not know exactly when, but it will be this year. Now back to Robert Zuzi. On the way there, to Halep in Syria, a German-speaking policeman in Reyhanli, whom I knew from previous trips to Syria, told him what had happened regarding my accident. So Robert came back to Iskenderun, and then, when I discharged myself from hospital with a note saying, treatment prescription insufficient, and then fell into delirium, accompanied me to Damascus and then traveled to Jordan and probably on to Israel. Well, the driver of the other bus was drunk and scraped past our bus, throwing my left arm out of the window, crushing it and knocking me unconscious. As a result, I was simply laid in the ditch on the side of the road and covered up, because they thought I was dead. It was not until 4 hours later that a doctor who had been called in realized that I was still alive, so I was taken to hospital and my crushed arm was amputated. At that time, there was the Cyprus dilemma, and injured military personnel from there were in the same room of the hospital where I was, and these military personnel were well looked after, while I, as a foreigner, was not treated very well. So after 8 days, I put on my bloody clothes and the shirt torn at the sleeve and discharged myself from the hospital. Then I remember walking along the street in Iskenderun and suddenly losing consciousness. Days later, I came to my senses again in Damascus in Syria. Shortly afterwards, my consciousness faded again, and when it returned, I was back in the north of Syria, in Halep, where I was conscious for a good 2 days before it faded again. And only in Iraq, in Baghdad, did my consciousness revive for a few hours, but only to fade again. When I regained consciousness, it was on a bench on Golden Beach in Kuwait City. I also realized that 1.5 months had passed since the accident, during which time I had apparently been traveling around in a delirious state and had come to Kuwait. Here in Switzerland, Silvano and I reported to the police in Pfeffikon when we were shot at in Salland, and fortunately, only the car windscreen was hit by a bullet. We saw the shooter running away with a rifle in his hand, and Silvano insisted that we go to the police. We told the policeman in Pfeffikon what had happened, but he turned us away anyway and claimed that the demolished car windscreen had only been hit by a stone from a passing car, even though there was absolutely no other car on the road, and we saw the shooter. So let us just say that and make it clear what has been played on us for around 50 years and is apparently being continued in the same or a similar way. But now let us continue with what I was talking about earlier. In particular, it is not the righteous but the unrighteous presidents of countries all over the world, and of course also their collaborators and followers, who do wrong and cause mischief by having strict and effective immunity in every unjust state around the earth against all their wrong and high-handed decisions and actions, as well as effective criminal offenses. This immunity for presidents is also or can also be given in countries that are governed by law. But the question is to what extent this immunity then applies on a case-by-case basis if the president is guilty. But it must be clearly stated that this immunity does not, however, apply to each individual person of the people, for each is at the mercy of the laws for every offense according to the comprehensive laws and penalties, and is punished without pardon for each individual offense, while the heads of the government of an unjust state get off without punishment for their unjust deeds and simply slip away as a result of their immunity if they enjoy the presidency of an unjust state or in dubious handling of the law enjoy impunity for injustice.
I am aware of some of this from Simyase's statements, because she was in charge here at the center in the beginning, then Ta, who also told me a lot. Consequently, I am oriented regarding these unjust machinations of state leaders. But now that the committee has given its consent to what you have asked, that some things should be spoken about openly, I would like to point out the following. When looking at the injustice of America, that such has been committed since time immemorial by extremely conscienceless U.S. presidents, and also continues to be committed, that in fact, never and never has one of the culpable U.S. presidents been brought to justice and held accountable for unfair and unlawful acts and orders, etc., which have claimed countless millions of human lives, and have done so since time immemorial, for which none of the fallible U.S. presidents have ever been convicted and punished by law.
Yes, to this day, nothing of that nature is known to me. Also, not that any U.S. president has ever been convicted and put behind bars for life for all forms of crimes, etc., carried out around the world on the orders of a powerful person in the U.S. by their order and will, as well as their malicious guilt and lust for power, in a spirit of revenge and in the name of all American states, their military army, together with the secret services and other forces, and also their politics. They have unscrupulously instigated, triggered, or unjustly interfered in uprisings and wars, thereby spreading disaster, misery, and hardship on earth in many places. They have thus committed millions of murders and encouraged rape, as well as destruction and the near extermination of peoples, and also promoted evil atrocities and disgust, as well as horrific misery and unspeakable hardship. Therefore, I think the truthful fact is that no fallible U.S. president has ever been impeached for the evil crimes he ordered. Not even for all the resulting mass of evil Ausartung, the millions of bestialities, tortures, atrocities, murders, destructions, and serious crimes, etc., as well as also not for all the roaring and unspeakable horrors, misery, and hardship. All of this has always gone unpunished because U.S. presidents are protected by their immunity, as is also the case with all the evil and monstrosities, such as what was done to women as a result of rape by the military, for which there was never a conviction or punishment. Other presidents, it should also be said, were and are also involved in other and very great crimes against humanity, even today, and especially in relation to overpopulation, which wants to and should be crazily driven up further. And presidents of all countries are calling for this, such as Putin, who, as was reported on the news this morning, has signed an order or a law, which I cannot confirm to be true, that will ban childless marriages in the future, presumably in order to secure more cannon fodder. But let us not get into that, because I had an inquiry about the Agent Orange used in the Vietnam War, which I will answer here because the person who made the inquiry reads the contact reports. So I did some research on the internet to explain everything in some detail, which has now revealed the following.
Evil after effects of Agent Orange in Vietnam. In the Vietnam War, America unscrupulously used Agent Orange, which crippled hundreds of thousands of children. But those responsible in America, above all those responsible, first and foremost the President of the USA, do not feel guilty about it, but continue their criminal behavior unchecked.
Agent Orange, whose international CAS identification number is 39277 TU 479, has nothing to do with the German term agent, which refers to a person who carries out orders from a government on a secret mission, or who carries out military or politically ordered or similar specific and usually illegal missions, such as murder, instigating intrigues and slander, or carrying out espionage, etc. Agents are also commissioned to carry out other criminal activities. Agents are also instructed to infiltrate other agents into a country or into corporations, etc., as well as to convict, arrest, or assassinate them. Agents are also used for industrial espionage, often on a commission basis, as well as for brokering profitable business deals, but also to place professionals, just as agents are also used in the diplomatic service, but without a diplomatic character. The term Agent Orange referred to the orange-colored label on the barrels containing Agent Orange. If the English term agent is interpreted more closely, then it means something else, namely agent or in an extended form active ingredient. Consequently, this term also applies to other, but less well-known herbicides such as Agent Blue, Agent Purple, Agent Green, Agent Pink, and Agent White. Agent Orange is a chemical defoliant that was used criminally by the U.S. Army in the Vietnam War and in the Laotian Civil War to destroy crops on a large scale. In January 1965, the American Armed Forces used this dangerous defoliant for the first time as part of Operation Ranch Hand to destroy the enemy Viet Cong or FNL guerrilla movement's cover. namely the dense foliage of the jungle in which the Viet Cong preferred to operate. The defoliation of the jungle's very dense foliage made the Viet Cong's activities and their food supply more difficult. The Agent Orange, which was made from herbicide and contaminated with tetrachlorodibenzodioxin, that is to say, TCDD, was sprayed over large areas by U.S. Army helicopters and aircraft, which on the one hand sickened around 250,000 U.S. soldiers, but also several 100,000 inhabitants of the areas where the Agent Orange was sprayed, which was also carried by the wind, contaminating much of the land and the flora and soil. The fact that countless human beings and animals, creatures and self-perpetuating life forms of all genera and species were poisoned, died, and their offspring crippled by this poison is absolutely clear and cannot be disputed. Now, TCDD, known as the most toxic of the dioxins, which is a waste product of combustion processes, for example, is a very toxic compound, especially of chlorine and hydrocarbons. This poison causes serious damage to health, as it also causes developmental damage to the bodies of growing children and the fruit of pregnant women. As a result, growing children, like the embryo and then from the 9th week after fertilization onwards, the fetus in the pregnant woman's body, suffer crippling developmental damage to the body. Among other things, TCDD has a phytotoxic or teratogenic effect, as can be seen from specialist publications, and it has biological, chemical, or physical influencing factors, and can therefore cause malformations in the organism. TCDD is also very persistent, which means that it remains in the environment for a long time and can be absorbed by life forms via the respiratory tract and skin, and thus have a harmful and crippling effect on the organism. And when we talk about life forms, we are first and foremost referring to human beings, as well as animals, creatures, and all self-moving life forms of all genera and species that are capable of absorbing the toxin through the skin envelope or through the respiratory system or mouth. However, no studies have apparently been conducted or made public on this subject, but it is only logical to say that poisons of all kinds are toxic to all genera and species of self-propelling life forms. The two presidents, Richard Nixon and Lyndon Baines Johnson, were the real culprits who were responsible for the start of the Vietnam War with lies. However, they were never held accountable for the lies they used to justify the Vietnam War, nor also for the use of Agent Orange, which lasted from 1961 to 1972. This defoliant poison resulted in hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese children being born crippled with severe birth defects. Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon were also never held accountable after their presidency. To this day, the Vietnamese population continues to suffer from the effects of the use of Agent Orange and other toxic substances which are still hushed up today that poisoned immeasurably large parts of the country during the Vietnam War, from 1965 to 1975 by the U.S. Army. The person responsible for this was U.S. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, then his successor, President Richard Milhous Nixon, who ended the Vietnam War, after which the Viet Cong disbanded in 1975. Nixon created a reduction in U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, as well as a policy of détente with the Soviet Union and China, whereby he secretly formed a kind of friendship with China and Mao Zedong respectively, which he secretly maintained until Mao died in September 1976. On 9th of August 1974, Nixon resigned as President of the USA because he was threatened with impeachment, for which he wanted revenge, as he confided to a friend. His resignation came about because he had allowed the White House to commit serious abuses of his governmental authority on his behalf, naturally during his term of office as Republican President of the USA. The poisons are still having an effect today and are claiming countless victims, because the Americans have contaminated the country with their use of poisons to such an extent that these poisons will remain underground for a very long time and spread their effects. As a result, the effects that became more widespread during and after the copyright 2024 at Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Simya Say Silver Star Center. Hinter Schmiedriti 1225, 895 Schmiedriti. Switzerland were drastically increased, as did physical and also organic deformities, and of course they occurred drastically above all in adolescent and newborn children, and still occur today. Cancer also became a malignant and epidemic plague, as did many other diseases and the spread of immunodeficiencies. According to Abemunda, which deals with these monstrosities, an estimated 1.56 million Vietnamese are currently affected by the long-term effects of Agent Orange and other poisons, although the USA has not yet provided any information about the further use of poisons or even made them public. Thus, some 60 years after the use of many tons of Agent Orange and other poisons, which were secretly intended to have an eradicating effect on the population of Vietnam, as Bemunda was able to find out, late effects on health are still common today, as offspring are still being born today who show deformities of the organs and body. However, all those affected in this way receive no real help or compensation from America, while the U.S. military personnel affected and harmed by the effects of Agent Orange and the toxins received compensation, which had to be paid by the company responsible for producing the devil's stuff at the time. However, this was also only done after protracted legal disputes succeeded in making the manufacturing company liable for the consequences. However, this was fundamental only for the U.S. military, who waged war in Vietnam on behalf of U.S. Presidents Johnson and Nixon, and consequently murdered, raped and then summarily shot Vietnamese women and children, as was also done in other wars, and is still common practice in every war that takes place anywhere on Earth. But people keep quiet about it, because this kind of war crime does not belong in the public eye and might not make the military murder organizations heroes. And the fact that a class action lawsuit seeking compensation and help for those affected by the long-term effects was rejected in the USA in 2005 was crushed with the unbelievable lie that at the time, the use of Agent Orange was not chemical warfare and therefore also did not constitute a violation of international law in any wise. This judgment prevented the Vietnamese victims from going away empty-handed, and they have not received any compensation to this day.
This is what I now know and have seen and experienced for myself with Ascot, as well as what I have searched, found, and learnt regarding Agent Orange on the internet in addition to all that I already knew.
Good. I guess that is also enough. Consequently, I can now say some of what I have learnt in the meantime, and especially regarding the history of America and some of the U.S. presidencies. But I have also learnt a lot about other presidents and dictators of various states and their history, which has given me a greater knowledge of them. As a result, I have learnt how a president can often maintain his power. For example, in America, where a U.S. president can not only instigate a military coup somewhere in a country at any time, but can even order or start a war anywhere in the world. He can also order the secret services or special military units to carry out special missions and assassinations, such as murdering one or more political opponents without being held accountable. This is because the U.S. president, like many presidents and other leaders of other states, has immunity for life, even if he is retired or otherwise no longer holds office. A fact that is simply tacitly accepted by the American people, who can do nothing about it, as is also the case in various other states where the leaders of the state alone decide and the people have no right to even raise a word about it. Also,
Yes, that is then fraudulently called democracy. And besides, there is no mention of the fact that different laws, rules, and regulations apply or are applied precisely to those in power than to ordinary citizens. who are certainly entitled to vote and decide and vote on proposals, but cannot exert any direct influence on those in power and their secret machinations. This is completely different here on Earth than it is for you, where you have a committee of 1.5 million persons that advises on all the concerns etc. of all your peoples, without determining, but observing and seeing how something develops. That is to say, whether it proves successful or not. So first, as I already know from Svath, an examination takes place, and only when what has been advised proves to be good and correct is it accepted and established as law, rule, regulation, or ordinance, etc.
That is indeed the case.
I know that, but it is not known to me how long the period of time is before the examination decision released by deliberation lasts until it is accepted or rejected.
That depends on the application of the matter to be examined, whereby, if I take the earthly time calculation to help me, the shortest duration is to be calculated as about 1 year, the longest duration as about 5 years.
That is good, because that prevents the nonsense that prevails with us on Earth, that simply makes it impossible for addicted idiots to invent and bring to effect and agenda new laws, ordinances, regulations, and rules, etc., which then restrict the freedom of human beings and vogue them.
This is indeed avoided, and precisely in this respect, I have learnt that you have recently said correctly in your exposition that at the present time on earth all peoples can call very many disadvantages and less freedom their own than at the time when bailiffs and the like prevailed. It is effectively true, as I have realized through my study of history in this respect, that today in all states on earth, as you said, there are 1,001 laws, rules, ordinances and regulations, etc., as a result of which the Earth humans are actually more bound and less free in many respects than in those times when bailiffs and other rulers ruled over the peoples.
With that, you confirm how I see and understand everything.
Yes, you can understand it that way. But now I want to continue talking about what I have learnt and explored. The media are ironcladly silent about it and allow themselves to be crushed by the might of the leaders of the state and their henchmen, who collectively, through the fact of immunity, are limitless power holders and co-responsible for the criminal injustice that reigns through them, through which those in power of every wise have more rights and enjoy more protection than any individual person of the people. And it must be said, as I have stated, that almost all of the peoples, with few exceptions, are silent about these machinations of the presidents. Also in America, and the U.S. judges even give the impression that the USA is a constitutional state and that the rules of the Supreme Court issued in each case are a fundamental principle of the USA. If all existing so-called democratic states in the world are observed, it is unfortunately clear that presidents of governments and certain other members of government enjoy immunity for acts they commit as wrongdoers in their office. Also in Switzerland, as I have recognized. Only private offenses can be prosecuted. Consequently, these officials are not subject to the law because of the immunity they enjoy in their office. If they abuse their activity and do wrong against all the law of their responsibility, given by the peoples in faithful trust, or abuse it in a way that would in principle be punishable, but for which the officials who violate the law remain completely unpunished because of their immunity granted to them. This is absolutely unjust, and if a normal person from among the people were to do the same, they would be brought to justice, punished and put behind bars with the severity of the law. But this alone would be the right thing to do if it applied without exception to every public official, for only then would every public official be on an equal footing with the normal people. For in principle, every public official, even if he or she is a government official, should not and must not have any more or special rights than any human being among the people, which means that there must be no immunity. Since time immemorial, as I have now learned, it has been said on earth, equal rights for all, and this right can only be observed if there is no immunity from punishment, meaning that the law of punishment and punishability for any kind of offense against this also applies and must apply to the lowest to the highest office holder of the state leaders. This alone can prevent presidents or other members of government and hangers-on, etc., from not being protected from criminal charges and penalties by immunity, and also from not being as free in their decisions as their mandate of immunity requires. Presidents or members of the government and other official hangers-on in all states of the world are also persons like any person of the people, without special rights and privileges or immunity, for this only applies as protection as long as the laws are obeyed and not willfully violated. However, it must always be borne in mind that these laws are just, reasonable, and ratifiable for the safety of life. Criminal acts and violations, etc., if they are not recognized during the term of office but only afterwards, are also subject to criminal prosecution,